Hello and welcome. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm Dave. That's Tim. Tim.
Yes.
We got an interesting week lined up here.
Oh, yeah.
I had a lot of fun last night with Supernatural news, and I know we filled the whole show with Supernatural news, and I'm getting a lot of response regarding the last bit we played, that TED Talk.
Yeah.
And I hope people do take that seriously.
Yeah.
If you missed it last night, if you don't listen to the whole episode, at least go to the last 10 minutes of the episode. We play a segment of a TED Talk about a woman who had a paranormal experience that ended up saving her life. And I think it's very important for people to hear. And this isn't a joke, but I think people should be aware of this and have it checked in their own home. So I don't want to give it away because I want you to listen to the story. It's an engaging story. We only played part of it.
Right.
And we've got the whole TED Talk up on our site now. So you can at our Facebook and Twitter pages. But that's going on. Tomorrow, Tim, the Great Pyramid Hoax. Scott Crichton from Glasgow, Scotland, will be joining us. And we're going to be talking about conspiracies to conceal the true history of ancient Egypt. Yeah. And people have liked some of these history and mystery stories we've been doing recently, and the forbidden knowledge and lost histories of these different deals. So we're going to keep dabbling in that here and there.
I'm particularly intrigued by ancient Egypt. So
now Thursday, the Ghost Brothers TV show, Dalen Spratt will join us, one of the Ghost Bros, and their show debuts again this Friday. I think their new episodes kick off on TLC. I believe they moved from Destination America to TLC. Yeah, you know me.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, well, they're owned by the same. They're owned by the same company, but I guess they're going to build the paranormal brand. We'll talk to Dalen about that.
Okay.
When we speak to him, and then Friday, Mysterious Tales from people you'd least expect. Karen Stolzno will be our guest. She's a fascinating lady, Australian, Tim.
Really?
I could live a long lifetime listening to her voice. She is very well spoken, very intelligent, and she's got some really great stories that she's collected from people you wouldn't necessarily have expected to believe in the mysterious ways, including Joe Nickel.
Really?
Joe Nickel, who we've had on the show.
Yeah.
Big skeptic. Big something else, too.
Has stories, huh?
Yeah. So, he's got some interesting stories.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that. Now, one of the shows that we found out, and we found this out by accident, actually, not really sure where you go with the field of cryptozoology and cryptids. But the idea that Bigfoot still captures the imagination the way it does.
Right.
Sasquatch, skunk ape, wild man, whatever they refer to it as. What we had noticed, some people were pirating our show and listening to it on YouTube.
Yes.
So what they would do is they'd take our content, cut off the opening of our show, and then place it on under their little guise of whatever their channel was.
Correct.
And re-airing our show without permission.
Yeah.
And we stumbled upon it. But one of the only positives that came from somebody ripping off our material was we were astounded. We hear from ghosties all the time. People love the ghost stories, love the demonic and paranormal and that weird stuff. But we were finding that we were getting 4 to 5 times the downloads of people intrigued by cryptids and Bigfoot encounters, Sasquatch. So we've been trying to work those in more often because obviously people enjoy this and they want to know more. So when we're doing this, we've since December 19th have been here with Beyond the Darkness.
Yep.
And we've dabbled in a few different aspects. Well, you can't go too far talking about cryptids without talking to our next guest. And as we continue to hear more of these stories, are you, Tim, more engaged by the idea of Bigfoot or feeling more distant to the idea that this creature exists?
I've always been intrigued by the stories. The stories captivate me, but I'll tell you this much, of all the paranormal phenomena that are out there, I think the one that seems the most realistic to me, the one that seems to hit home with me, that I could buy into if I'm going to go all in, is Bigfoot. I really do believe that it could be some form of
large bipedal hominid creature that still exists out there. Yeah. Well, we're all of that like mind, and just trying to the fascination on this, and dogman stories,
right,
and lizard men and mothmen and these large owl-like creatures. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of dip into this more and talk with one of the guys that we like and respect in the field. and he is a researcher. He's an author, a musician, cryptid researcher from Texas. Lyle Blackburn joins us for the first time on Beyond the Darkness. He's been with us numerous times over the years on Darkness Radio. His investigative cryptozoology books, such as The Beast of Boggy Creek and Lizard Man, reflect his lifelong fascination with legends and sighting reports of real-life monsters. During his research, Lyle has often explored the remote reaches of the southern U.S. in search of shadowy creatures said to inhabit the dense backwoods and swamplands of these areas. Lyle's also a staff writer for the monthly horror magazine Rue Morgue and founder of the rock band Ghoul Town. Lyle's been heard on numerous radio programs, including Coast to Coast AM, and has appeared on various television show airings on Discovery, Animal Planet, Destination America, A&E, HGTV, CBS, and served as consulting producer and special episode host for the TV show Monsters and Mysteries in America. Most recently, Lyle was featured in a documentary film called Boggy Creek Monster. His new book, Beyond Boggy Creek, In Search of the Southern Sasquatch, brings him back to our show this evening. Lyle Blackburn, thank you for being a part of the show with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Fascinating stuff. For our listeners, let's take it back a little bit. The Beast of Boggy Creek and Lizard Man. Let's talk a little bit about those and then go into the new book and the new legends that you're looking into. What is the history of Boggy Creek?
Well, it was kind of the Southern Sasquatch case that is most notable and most famous, and that's due to a 1972 movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. And people of a certain age probably remember that.
Why, yes, I do, Lyle. I remember that. That was right in my wheelhouse as a kid, yeah.
And so that's something that, myself included, I remember seeing at a drive-in theater here in Texas when I was a kid, and I was already into the subject of Bigfoot and things like that. But at that point, all the Bigfoot information really that I had was that it was mostly confined to the Pacific Northwest, and the incidents that were dramatized in The Legend of Boggy Creek were based on actual reports, and those were coming from southern Arkansas, which was about 3 hours from where I lived. So once I saw that, and just the way the movie sensationalized it and made it spooky and scary, that really grabbed my imagination. And later, as an adult and still into this type of subject, it was something that I thought somebody needed to write a book on this. Everybody knew The Legend of Boggy Creek, and most Bigfoot researchers will cite that as one of the influential things as to why they were into the subject. And so, I just set out to research that case and just sort of separate fact from fiction. And that resulted in my first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek.
Now, what really stood out about this encounter, Lyle? Was it an aggressive creature? Was it just large and menacing and out of place, out of time kind of story? What exactly about it do you think captured so many people's imagination?
Well, I think part of that was the time period in which it was released, and it came out in 1972 with regional play in Texarkana and Shreveport, Louisiana, that area. And then through 1973 on, that was kind of the height of the Bigfoot surge in the 70s. You had the Patterson-Gimlin film was being seen more on TV and in documentaries, and the show In Search Of. So it hit at the right time, and the way the movie was done was in this sort of docudrama fashion. It's what you see now in horror movies, where you see the sort of found footage thing.
Right.
But at the time, it was really the forerunner of shows you see, even on In Search Of, but a lot like Monster Quest and things where you see him reenacting it, and you have the real eyewitness talking about what he had seen. And that was the way the movie was, very effective. Because when I was a kid watching it, I was thinking, how in the world was this guy filming it at the same time this person was seeing this? It was so real and so gripping. And of course, a lot of the encounters that were dramatized, and actually the real reports were of a creature that was more dangerous. It was aggressive. It was, returning to homes at night. And, that really obviously made the stories in the newspaper at the time more captivating, and then that translated as well to the movie. So that's one of the reasons that it sort of put the southern Sasquatch on the map and also gave it a reputation for being dangerous and aggressive.
We've had a lot of talk over the last year and a half on our show about these more dark encounters with Bigfoot. And are you hearing more of this? Is it because we're encroaching more in their territory? They're feeling more pressured? Or has the more malevolent interactions always existed, but people have been afraid, embarrassed, or ashamed to try to come forward with their stories?
Well, I think they've always existed. You just have those cases where, the majority of them are brief sightings, the creature is shadowy, it runs across the road, or they see it from a distance. But, even if you look back in history and you find those encounters where the creatures, are more aggressive, and even, reports of them, grabbing people, causing harm, even supposedly killing people, things like that. So it's something that really does go back a long way. And I think, if this is a real animal, you can, it makes sense like other animals. I mean, not all bears are running after us and chasing us, and most are, in a good mood. But then you have those incidents where right place, right time, wrong place, somebody's attacked. And I think it could be the same thing for Sasquatch.
Lyle, have you encountered something you believe to be the legendary Bigfoot or Sasquatch?
No, I've never had a sighting that I would definitively say was one of these creatures. I've been out there and heard howls and things that I can't explain. I've found footprints that appear to be from one of these creatures, but as far as the sighting, it's something that sort of is that perpetual carrot in front of me. It's something I would really like to do. And the more people I interview and the more of these stories I look into, it just seems like any minute I would be lucky, but apparently not so far.
Have you experienced these wood knocks and whooping calls that have been heard? Or do you think a lot of this is just hyped up nonsense for TV shows?
Well, I mean, certainly, you have to kind of separate the TV shows from real life. They need to have things happen, and truly those weird things happen in the woods. I mean, just hear a lot of bizarre stuff. And in my investigations, and I grew up, my father's a bow hunter, and I was in the woods, as soon as I could walk, basically. And, I'm familiar with strangeness that happens out there. So, some of the wood knocks, there are cases where it certainly leads one to believe that it could be one of these creatures. Then again, limbs fall, trees fall, hit rocks. There's all kinds of noises that go on all the time that, could be possible explanations. So you really have to be skeptical about what you hear. But even at that, there are things like, what I heard was not a whooping call, but it was a bizarre kind of howling, moaning sound. And I've heard plenty of coyotes and even strange birds. Foxes make extremely weird noises. Myself and a guy I was with who used to be a trapper in Mississippi, neither one of us could make any sense of this, and we heard it 6 times in a short period of time. So, that's something that I just can't. I don't have any explanation for.
Talking about lizard men, and I know you covered this in your first book, where are these sightings primarily held? I mean, are they something that's widespread like Bigfoot, or are they really kind of in specific territories?
Well, there are definitely fewer of those type, what I kind of classify as the reptilian humanoid type creatures. Specifically, when I wrote my book, Lizard Man, that's primarily about a case that occurred in Bishopville, South Carolina, back in the late 80s. And that was sort of one of these flaps where numerous people reported seeing an upright, human-like creature that was covered in possibly scales. It was brownish or green, and the locals just dubbed it the lizard man. And that was sort of, to me, it was one of those cryptozoology cases that I'd always read about, and I knew some facts. And I actually went out there to Bishopville, and it's a small town, swampy area, has all the ingredients for, a monster tale. And as I looked into it and I realized there was so much to the story that became a book, So, but when you come down to it, that case had a lot of sightings, and I do have reports from other places like Mississippi and even Texas of these creatures, but they're definitely not as many as Bigfoot by any means.
And are these creatures aggressive in nature as well, or are they much like real lizards in the wild? They just want to be avoided and will quickly dart off. What kind of stories do you get with that?
Well, one of the most famous cases with the Bishopville lizard man, and one of the early encounters was a young man who had a flat tire in this area of Skateboard Swamp late at night. And according to him, he sees this creature come up out of the fennel grass and is running towards him in the moonlight. And, he had just finished changing the flat. He jumps in his car, and the thing tried to get in the car. He jumped on it, and he was able to speed away. But
Eesh.
I mean, that right there obviously drew my attention, because there's a sensational and got a lot of substance to the story. So that was an aggressive one. But then again, like Bigfoot, you do have just these sort of, quick sightings. But the thing about the lizard man, no matter what it is, it's some spooky stuff. I mean, it's the sightings of that thing just bring chill bumps, because the thought of any sort of a creature like that is just to me is even spookier than Bigfoot. Because it just seems so much more
creepy.
Yeah, it's just flat out creepy. And
that's primordial stuff there. I mean, you get past the idea that, Bigfoot may be kind of linked to us, right? A large bipedal hominid, a big, possible great ape that we haven't discovered. That has been given very human characteristics. When you see something like a lizard doing the same thing, I think V screwed us all with that old TV series in the 80s. With that concept of lizards. There's a lot of ideas being bandied about that these creatures are alien in nature, and that, they're coming to us from other places. As a serious researcher, Lyle, do you give any credence or credit to that kind of idea, or do you think that that's where it starts getting outlandish and outside of the realm of believability?
Well, I mean, I suppose, nothing's too far-fetched that it could happen, but I think there is a lot of assumptions and a lot of, this talk of absolutes and this and that about that sort of subject. And you really are going off into uncharted waters. I mean, it's, in the case of the Bishopville lizard man, and people ask this a lot, I kind of looked at it as a cryptozoology case, because you just didn't have, for it to be, to me, extraterrestrial, you're going to need corresponding UFO sightings and all that weirdness that comes in. And there just really wasn't any. It just seemed so much like a creature that was coming up out of the swamps. But certainly when you start talking reptilian stuff, you can quickly go down the rabbit hole with, shapeshifters and subterranean race of people that live, inside the earth, as well as extraterrestrials. The reptilian thing is something that has a lot of branches, I would say. And, I kind of tried to keep the Bishopville story, but certainly you could go all directions with all kinds of crazy stuff.
Now, digging into the research and information for your new book, and you're going beyond Boggy Creek in search of Southern Sasquatch, what is the direction? Take us through the idea behind this new story.
Well, as I, put out The Beast of Boggy Creek, and, the book was well received, people liked my approach to that. I wasn't trying to persuade anybody one way or another. We're just simply telling the details of the case as I understood them and the history of that. But it's not the only thing that I've researched. And being in the South and having researched this subject, I was building up case files and knew of historical encounters all over the Deep South that to me were just as fascinating as the legend of Boggy Creek, but they just, didn't have a movie made and, sometimes fly under the radar. So I thought, hey, it would be very cool to kind of start with this premise that, the Boggy Creek case is certainly maybe the most famous of the Southern Sasquatch cases. But if you start branching out, moving up the waterways, and in the movie they would always say it always follows the creek. And that's something you see as a theme in the Bigfoot sightings. They follow these waterways. So I started, at the Boggy Creek, Southern Arkansas area, and started branching out along these creeks and talking about all the other encounters and historical cases of Sasquatch-like creatures, and that sort of goes from, Arkansas to Oklahoma, Texas, and then just basically move east all through the Mississippi, Louisiana, the bayous, and then sort of end up in Florida where you have the skunk ape cases, which are very similar. There's a lot of similarities in these. So that was just sort of my, taking a springboard from the Boggy Creek case and going beyond that and just going all over the southern U.S. So it was an undertaking, let me tell you.
I bet. The stories of this are you finding stories that are always set kind of in distant little areas, or are there community Bigfoot? Are there, creatures that are close to subdivisions and housing areas in these different stories that you're collecting now? The majority of them are going to take place in the more remote, rural areas. And it makes logical sense. If these creatures do exist, they would, they need to stay in those type of places to survive and to stay rather elusive. But there were a few occasions where some more developing areas would have sightings. There was one in, let's say, Happy Valley, Florida. And, it sounds like a real friendly kind of place. But, they saw definitely some good sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature there. And that was a place that was starting to develop. And possibly it could be that they disturbed the habitat, and they sort of, displaced this creature, and therefore, as more people moved in there, they would see it, and then it would be seen for a while, and then just the sightings would just go away. So you do have few cases where they do edge closer to civilization. All right, talk to me about some of the research that you're doing now, and where is this spreading? Are we seeing more of these creatures now than we've seen before, Lyle, or is this something that is still limited, and do you believe the numbers are being contained or maybe even getting smaller?
Well, it seems like to me that in some ways it seems like there's more sightings, but the more I dug historically into these, and as I do in my research, I try to interview firsthand witnesses when possible, and I've even traveled all over the Deep South and interviewed people. And as you go there, you start to find a lot of old stories that just weren't on the record. Some of these maybe, were documented in newspapers, and you have a whole bunch that, nobody ever either didn't tell many people or, just wasn't on the historical record. Nowadays, it's so much easier to disseminate the information. If somebody has a sighting, it's quickly on the internet, or they look up a Bigfoot group and file a report, and then that gets shared. So I think it's been fairly consistent throughout. It's just that the information spreads so much faster, and as well, I think it's more acceptable to say you've seen something like this, where in past times you really didn't want people to know because they would think you're crazy. I mean, you could, have social consequences, for that. You could lose your job. I mean, any number of things. But now with shows like Finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet's been running for 8 years, people understand, well, I guess a lot of people see this stuff, so I'm not the only one. I'll go ahead and share my story. So I think it's just a lot of factors, but I think consistently there's just been sightings that have occurred at a pace, as long as we've been inhabiting these areas.
All right, we've got a lot more to cover beyond Boggy Creek in search of the southern Sasquatch. We'll hear some of these other encounters that Lyle's collected and some of the research that he's been doing. All right, when we come back, more beyond Boggy Creek in search of the southern Sasquatch. Lyle Blackburn, our guest here on Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the darkness.
And you're back here on the best in paranormal talk radio. Beyond the Darkness is on the air. I'm Dave Schrader. That's Tim Dennis. All right, Tim.
Yes.
You hear about these encounters, and Lyle's telling us about it. Now you're hearing about lizard men.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's creepy, right? A lizard jumping on the car. You would think in that case there's got to be some kind of evidence left behind. Are you getting a fin? Are you getting scales?
Right. Yeah.
Blood samples? Especially when they're that aggressive. Are they leaving behind any kind of trace evidence?
Right.
I want to know about that. I want to talk about these Sasquatch encounters. Why in 2017, at this point, with high definition cameras everywhere, on everybody's phone, why are we not getting more conclusive evidence to back these accounts from eyewitnesses? And I understand in some cases you're just taken by surprise. When I saw the UFO over Trout Lake, Washington, I didn't think to pull out my camera. I just was astounded and I didn't want to take my eyes off it.
Right.
So, what's really going on out there? Tonight we're talking beyond Boggy Creek in search of the southern Sasquatch. Lyle Blackburn is our guest. You can find more information at lyleblackburn.com. And Lyle, you worked on the Boggy Creek documentary through smalltownmonsters.com, and that's out and available right now, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's been released. And, that's something that those guys, Small Town Monsters, had done a couple of regional Bigfoot documentaries, and I had spoken to the director, Seth Breedlove, prior to him ever doing films, and we had kind of talked about our appreciation for these, rural cases where there's a small town and there's a history of monster sightings and so forth. And obviously, at some point, the Boggy Creek case was going to come up, and he felt it was, a good one to cover as the third film. And he approached me, obviously, as having, done the research and had the connections to get us some witnesses for the interviews, because the films are really driven by the firsthand accounts from the witnesses. So we filmed that over the last year. And, it's been released and, still getting good reviews, winning various awards and things like that. So, that really has paid off. And in many ways, it's kind of like my Beast of Boggy Creek book come to life. I can recount the history and retell these stories, even from people I've, interviewed myself, but to hear them tell their stories in person, and to see that really is bringing the visuals and the next step to the audience. And that's one of the best things about this. And it's filmed very beautifully. The cinematography is amazing. And you get a lot of those great shots down in the bayous there, just like you see in the old Legend of Boggy Creek movie. And of course, we talk about some of the history of that. We go to some of the places that haven't been seen since that movie was filmed in the 70s. So the project was, just really amazing and a great thing to be a part of, and just to have worked on that and take sort of the next level to the visuals was really cool.
I brought up the fact in the opening here, talking about, that lizard man that jumped on the car. Was there any kind of evidence left behind from that encounter? Blood, scales, a fang, a claw, anything that could be looked at as real evidence from this encounter happening?
Well, in that particular case, when the young man, had that situation, he was living at his parents' at the time. He was I think he was a senior in high school. He drove to his parents' house and got out, ran inside, and was obviously completely shook up and, was trying to tell his father what happened. And his father, said, well, let's look at the car. And he went out there and the driver's side mirror was broken. He said he could see scratches, on the door and on the hood. And, so the problem is they didn't go to the police immediately. They didn't know. I mean, they were like, what do we do? It wasn't until the police got a call about a completely unrelated incident that people related that it could be the lizard man. And that kind of became a topic, got printed in the newspaper. And that's when this Christopher Davis came forward with his father. They went down to the sheriff's office and said, hey, we've got something that may apply to this so-called lizard man. So by the time they got there, and this is 1988, small town, South Carolina, it just wasn't something where they're going to start trying to get DNA or anything like that. It just, the best they could do was the sheriff interviewed the young man, interviewed his father, and eventually he was put under a lie detector test, which he passed. And, the sheriff felt absolutely confident that something scary happened to the kid. Now he couldn't say it was a lizard man or any, definitively, but it was the consensus of the police that the kid had been attacked by something. So that's the best you get. From there, later cases, there was some vehicles that were attacked and they tried to take some DNA from that. But at the time in 1988, they just didn't do it.
What about evidence in all of these southern Bigfoot cases? I know off air we talked about something in Georgia that had taken place. Can you fill us in on that story? And do you believe that there's something there that legitimately gives science something to look at in the research category for these kind of stories?
Well, I think there is evidence. And, you often get that question, well, where is the evidence? And certainly, the stories are fascinating and great and fun, a fun part of it. But, there is those times when some hard evidence has been taken. In one case, which, I cover in the book, back in the late 90s, in this little place called Elkins Creek, Georgia, the sheriff's department kept getting calls from this older couple at night, and they would say something is creeping around our residence. It's been trying to get in. It's tearing things up. It got into our feed shed out there that they used to feed some of their animals, and the police kept showing up down there, and in particular this one deputy. But he could never find anything. By the time he got there, he had to drive down a long winding road and, here's his lights. Whatever it was always gone. Later on, this kept happening, and the people were kind of describing something that seemed possibly like a Bigfoot. Well, the sheriff's office thought, well, this is somebody trying to run these people out. It's got to be humans. Maybe, somebody's got a still down there and they want these old people out of the woods for whatever reason. So finally, the deputy said, can I come down here during my off hours during the day when it's daylight and look around? And, the people had enough. They said, please come back. So he went down there, and in the process of looking around, he found what looked kind of like a game trail. It would have been an entrance to their property from the woods, and it led down to this Elkins Creek. And as this deputy was investigating down there, he sees these huge footprints that had come up out of the water and walked up on the bank. And he didn't know what to make of these things, but they're huge. They measure about 18 inches long. They've got 5 toes and look, like what you think a Bigfoot track would look like. Well, he had the wherewithal to take his plaster down there and make a cast and take it out of there. Well, he didn't really believe in Bigfoot or know what to think about this, and he just sort of stored the cast. And, long story short, that eventually got brought out to somebody who sent this cast to Dr. Meldrum, who is a anatomy professor from Idaho State University. He's a well-known Bigfooter. He examined it, and also a guy who is a fingerprint expert and analyst for the police department in Conroe, Texas. They both analyzed it. They found what they believed to be dermal ridges, which are basically like fingerprints, but in the foot of this. And in their mind, and especially in the fingerprint analyst, he believes this is the track of some organic animal, possibly a huge primate. And that track is just amazing looking. And so there is, what I would consider possible hard evidence, especially in a southern Bigfoot case, because people often think, southern Bigfoot, is there Bigfoot down there? Well, yeah, there's many stories. And in this case, there's possible evidence.
Dermal ridges, we hear a lot about this, and this is something that seems to lend more credence to the idea that this is something legitimate outside of tufts of unknown fur, of unknown origin. But I've also heard on the other side that dermal ridges don't necessarily denote that this is a creature, that this is not indicative of ape creatures. This isn't indicative necessarily of human creatures. What can you tell us regarding that aspect of this and the misinformation or disinformation that's being given out there?
Well, I think in that case, I'm no expert on foot anatomy or dermal ridges, but the analyst, his name is Jimmy Chilcutt. He's also studied primate footprints and gotten into this whole possibility of dermal ridges in these footprints. And if he believes that is indicative of a primate-like footprint, then who am I to argue that? I mean, this is what his life's work is. He has been a witness for even the FBI in cases like that. I mean, this is his trade. He's an expert at that, and he was also somebody that didn't believe in Bigfoot, but didn't mind looking into this. And once he started looking into it, he found that track and several others exhibited what he also sees in primate footprints. So, I would defer to the expert on that and say that, it's not definitive evidence because no one saw the creature make the print. It's just something there. And, you can't even say it's not a hoax because they may have tried, it could be some fancy latex they used to make the print. But,
right.
Who would go down in this remote ravine and make this print way out there? What are the chances the deputy would have even found that? It just seems, if somebody's trying to make hoaxes, they would do it, where people were going to find it, a state park or something.
Sure.
So, it's just one of those things that leads you to keep an open mind, I guess.
We're often told that the tufts of fur that are given are always discredited. First of all, in the way that they're collected, a lot of times human DNA will intermingle with it, or if they've got hunter dogs with them, things like that. So they don't always get pristine bits of evidence to bring in. Are there any that you're aware of? Any tufts of fur and evidence that have been collected that science looks at and says we cannot definitively say what this is from?
Well, you're right that, yes, a lot of these, were very hopeful, and it ends up being either a bear or shows human DNA or something, and that could be from contamination, sure. I can't cite a specific well-known hair or anything, but there's definitely been some that I've, talked about or visited with other researchers where the hair cannot be identified. It just sort of is, it can't be proven either way. And I think those are dwell in that gray area where it doesn't offer much proof, but it doesn't disprove it,
Right.
And then the person who collected it believed it to be from a Bigfoot for whatever reason, and it doesn't match with human, and it doesn't match with a bear or, a cougar or any other known animal. What is it?
Right. And I would think in this day and age, especially with the Endangered Species Acts going on and people trying to, they can shut down logging industry, they can shut down all types of businesses because they've found a habitat for, a rare moth or grasshopper or bird or frog. If they're finding tufts of fur from an unknown origin, why do you think science is not taking a harder edge look at this and saying we need to shut this down? This area needs to be really looked at, because we've got something here that is outside the realm of our current understanding.
Well, I think because the paper trail of this is always typically going to lead back to somebody who was doing Bigfoot research, or in some way the Bigfoot term comes into play.
Well, so what? Who cares what research they were doing? If they're coming with tufts of fur that do not match a known animal, you would think that is still enough for science to take a look and respect that. Okay, it's coming from somebody we find on the fringe and don't necessarily believe, and maybe they're trying to give us monkey fur mixed with cat fur and call it a Bigfoot, but the fact is it's not coming back monkey fur, it's not coming back cat fur. We don't know what this is. That should be enough to stop science in its tracks to want to investigate.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
I mean, if it couldn't be identified, but I think it's more like if they found definite cougar hair or something that was a known, then it's a no-brainer. If that's something
right, exactly.
It's like they'll go for it. But if it comes in as, well, we're not sure what this is, and this whole, it was found by this dude who was looking for Bigfoot, and I think it eventually, some of those should have been taken more seriously, but for whatever reason haven't. Or, they've gotten into the right hands and somebody has eventually identified them as something known, and then it just sort of, the story just dissipates and goes away. So it's a tough thing.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating about this, because like Mulder, I want to believe that there are still some really uncharted species out there that are living right in plain view of us. And not some mysterious place like Papua New Guinea where, yeah, of course, there's going to be some unidentified objects going on there and unidentified creatures or thought extinct creatures. But I think it's fascinating that it might be right here among us. Do you believe, Lyle, that maybe the reason there's not this sincere look by science is because they already know that it exists and that they are really hiding the existence of these beasts or creatures?
I'm not so much for the conspiracy on that. I just don't see why hide it. Really, I mean, there's no evidence that it's being hidden. And I think most of the reason why they're not looking seriously is because Bigfoot early on became such a pop culture thing and became so, just not sciencey. There's games and action figures and all that other stuff that just, people are just predisposed to not want to touch it. I mean, you only have those handful of guys that don't care, and they put some stock into it. And, I can understand the skepticism of this. And, even myself, I try to be, I'm somewhat of an investigative journalist / guy who researches cryptids like in the woods. But at the end of the day, if they were to take the time to look at this stuff or to talk to the people I've talked to and look into this, there's that percentage of cases where I've interviewed the witnesses, I've known the witness, gotten to know them. There's no holes in their story, and I have no explanation for what they saw. There's one in our Boggy Creek Monster movie, which I count as the top of my list for a guy who had an encounter. He's just your average guy. He's well spoken. The place where he saw this was a place where you're not going to have the possibility of a hoaxer. He saw it within 60 feet. I 100% believe what he's telling me. He's got no reason to make this up, and it took me a long time to even convince him to share this story because of the ridicule factor. But I just can't explain what he saw, and that is enough for me alone to keep looking into this. It sort of fuels the fire for me to keep looking, even though the whole case just seems so improbable and impossible that these things could exist right under our nose. But there are those percentage of cases that just leave you scratching your head and saying there's got to be something.
Can you give us a little taste of what's that story about? What was his experience like that really kind of impressed you?
Well, for me, this was one that when I was researching the Boggy Creek case, and at first I thought I'm writing a historical type book, but people were like, no, there's been sightings that had happened all along. And there was one young man people kept referring me to that said he had a sighting in around 1981. And if this kid said he saw it, he saw it. They're so well respected in this community. And I met his father first, who still lived up there in Fouke, and he's very well respected, a deacon in the church up there, and everybody just thinks so highly of this family. And so I talked to the father and said, I'd really love to get his account. He said, well, he's always been reluctant because he finally told some people and they laughed. I said, well, look, I'm very serious about this subject. And so I eventually talked to him and met with him. And what happened was he was out one evening fishing in the pond at the back part of their property. And it's very wooded back there. It's right there in the heart of the area where a lot of these sightings had taken place. He didn't put much stock into the Boggy Creek thing at all. And he was very quiet, and the sun was starting to go down, and he thought, well, I'm just going to try right around this little corner here. If I don't catch any fish, I'm going to head back to the house. Well, he goes around this little corner, and he had heard something moving in the leaves for a little while. He said at that point, he heard what sounded definitely like footprints. And he looks up, and this thing walks, out from the trees up on an embankment within about 60 feet. And he sees it from a side profile view. And right then and there, he could see that this isn't a human. It's not somebody in a costume. It's not any other animal. It's definitely not a bear. It was walking upright on two legs, covered in hair. He estimated it to be at least 6 feet tall, maybe 7. And it walked up and walked over the bank and never saw him, which makes sense because he's quietly fishing, sitting on a pond, not making any noise. So the thing walked up over the embankment. Well, at that point, the kid starts, his mind races. He's like, oh, my God, I just saw the Fouke monster. What do I do? Paddles to the bank and kind of made some noise getting out. That's when he hears the footprints stop, footsteps stop. And then at that point, he just heard this thing just take off running. And then that was it. He just ran for the house as fast as he could. His father was there when he got there. His father, also shared the story and said, he was upset. He saw something. And again, this, is a person that I've come to know their family, and I can, bet my life that this guy saw something. I mean, he definitely doesn't want the exposure of the publicity. So everything sort of lined up as best you get with an anecdotal, eyewitness story that in my mind, it's their own property. Nobody's going to dress in a costume and walk back through those woods. They didn't even know anybody would be there. If it was a costume, they'd have been up on the road. So everything added up to me that this was the sighting of something completely unexplainable in a place where there's a long history of sightings. So there you go.
What other stories do you have? I know we don't have a whole lot of time left together here, but what are some of the other notable encounters that you've collected that really stand out to you as something above and beyond just I was driving along and I saw this hairy creature walk past me and across the road and into the woods? What else really kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of those. And people, and one thing that even amazed me is just how many places throughout the South that they had been seen, not only in environments of the swampy areas, but the mountain areas, and in the pine forests. And there was one there's one that really was spooky to me. This took place in Mississippi, a place where, it's not necessarily notable for Bigfoot territory, but this witness said that he was young, and they had that day that his dog had gotten run over, and they buried it back off in the woods somewhere. And, so he's feeling down, and they'd done that in the morning. He thought, well, I'm going to go, walk around in the woods for a while. I'm going to, take my BB gun and go out like kids do. And he goes down in there, and he goes down in that ravine, and eventually comes down to where they had buried that dog. And he said he hears something kind of moving in the leaves. And he got around there just up on the bank, and he sees this ape-like creature digging where they had buried the dog. And I'm thinking myself, if I was a kid and I'd seen that, what I would have done. But, he's armed with only a BB gun. He said he was scared to death. And as as the creature heard him and stopped his digging and looked up, it looked right at him. He sort of aimed that BB gun, knowing darn well that it's not going to do anything and not knowing what to do. And the creature just looked at him for a few moments, and then turned and ran. And then the kid, did the same thing and ran the other direction. But it just a spooky encounter, kind of indicative of what you would find in the legend of Boggy Creek. But this was, many, many miles away in the Mississippi area. And I just always thought, if I was that kid in the woods and had seen that after my dog had died, just spooky stuff. I love those stories,
Digging it up, do you think that they are scavengers? Do they eat roadkill? Do they eat the things that they find naturally dead in the woods? Or do you believe that it was just sniffing something and was digging up to see what it was?
Could have been curious, or could have been hungry. I think these creatures would have to be opportunistic in their diet, because they're huge. They need a lot of caloric intake, and, they're just going to be, always eating. Just think about yourself. If we were out in the woods, it's a full-time job to find enough to eat. So I think in some cases, and I've got reports of, my book starts right out with a report from East Texas where a hunter literally watched one of these things stalk some hogs and jumped on the hog and threw it against a tree, and then turned around and looked at the hunter, which was another spooky one. But, I think it could be that they're curious in the case of like digging up this dog, or, maybe it was hungry and it didn't have anything else to eat. I don't know, but just part of the mystery.
All right, we've got time for another quick tale or two of some of the other really cool, notable evidence or notable encounters you've collected for the work that you're doing. What else have you got for us?
Well, in a lot of times, some of the best ones that I find are again from people who are not looking for Bigfoot. People who, I've got, if you go out and look for Bigfoot and you see it every weekend, I'm not sure I count that as quality evidence. But you've got those, what I call civilians, people who do not want to see Bigfoot or do not know anything about Bigfoot. There was one from 1969, which occurred on Caddo Lake, which is between Louisiana and Texas. And this was one I stumbled on because I got to know this witness's daughter, and she happened to see that I go to Caddo Lake, and she said, well, my father saw something down there when he was younger, and you might want to talk to him. I thought, okay, this is good. And so I ended up speaking to him on the phone, and he said, yeah, well, in 1969, we were young at the time, and me and my brother always went down there to the remote area in Caddo Lake, and it's a very primitive environment. I mean, it's got the Spanish moss hanging down. I mean, it looks primordial, as far as that goes. And he said they had caught a lot of fish and had, cooked them up and, thrown the remains over to the side. And that night they had slept in this little makeshift treehouse shack that they had built, because they would go down there for days on end and just stay down there. So they had a little shelter. He said it was late in the evening, and he was awakened by something outside, making noise. And, his first thought was, this is going to be a raccoon or whatever. But he went ahead and looked through the the slats of the wood siding there, wasn't very well built. He could see right through it. And he said, as he looked out, to his horror, he sees this shape, human-like shape, but it was very huge, bulky. It was standing there digging in the remains of their meal. And there was enough moonlight that he could see it, well enough. And, now he's just starting to panic. He tries to wake up his brother. And as in the process of that, as his brother he starts to get up, sit up, whatever this thing was, heard them. And now it stands and looks and realizes there's somebody in that shack and looks right at him. And he said it was one of the most frightening experiences he's ever had. And it just stood there and looked for a moment. And he said it turned and ran extremely fast into the thicket and disappeared. Well, of course, they didn't get out and investigate that right then. He said, to his knowledge, he never slept another wink that night. But the next day they went out and they sort of used the tree to estimate the height. And he said the thing would have been about 7 feet tall. They found tracks that looked man-like, except were much larger. And he said one of the weird things about it was it said it had a really big toe. And one thing that struck me is I've got other reports from areas in the proximity of people that this guy absolutely doesn't know of that same sort of anatomy of the foot that had the 5 toes with a very large big toe. So again, this is a guy who at 1969, he didn't even know what Bigfoot was. He didn't classify it in terms of Bigfoot. He didn't know what to make of it. It was just this huge, hairy beast in the woods that walked upright. And the fact that he would just tell me about this big toe offhand made me, it kind of add credibility to what he was saying, especially because I had other reports that he was unaware of this sort of anatomy. So again, that's one of those that ranks high up there that I just can't explain what that guy saw. And, just a chilling and amazing encounter.
All of these encounters keep coming to you, Lyle. You're talking to people around the world, around the United States that have these firsthand eyewitness accounts, secondhand eyewitness accounts. When they're telling you this, how do you denote? I mean, I have 7 kids. They can be very convincing when they lie. How do you know that what you're hearing and who you're encountering is telling you the truth? I mean, I know the idea is behind, they have nothing to gain from it. They didn't even want to come forward. But people like to insert themselves in history. They like to, perfect example, Laura Ingalls Wilder, in her later years wrote about how this cannibal family that was in one of the states they came through, and this they believe were one of the first serial killers in the United States, how Pa and some of his family members and friends went out and took care of this family, and they vanished and were never seen again. But historical records prove that the Wilder or the Ingalls family were nowhere in that neighborhood or in that area when this family was out there murdering. And this just became part of lore and legend. And because Laura said it, people believed it for a long time. What did she have to gain from it? It inserted her and her family into another point in history that made her intriguing to listen to. And that's what I run into is, I love to listen to people's stories. And there's sometimes you get that glazed over look in their eyes when they're telling you, like my grandfather would get when he would tell me about World War II, that that they're there in that place right now. And other times they just are so matter of fact about it, so plain that to me it just seems like, the believability factor is really hard for me at that moment because they don't even seem to be engaged in their own story.
Right. Yeah. It's a challenge because, you have to sort of filter out those that you think are not credible. And, for me, there are those numbers that I've talked to people I can quickly dismiss. And they do seem like they're trying to insert themselves into something. And, there's those that seem like they, can I get on one of your TV shows or something like that? Those are the ones that red flags go up very quickly. Or the people that seem to have seen them so frequently. And especially while I lived in, Mississippi, and then I moved to Oklahoma and I saw one there too. It's like, that's a little too lucky. And so I can usually, move to 3 different states and saw them. It just gets wild. But I can kind of rule out those pretty fast. Of course, there's others that I don't, I can't put 100% stock in them. It's only, but there's a number of these where this guy, he's not writing books. He's not making memoirs, not trying to insert. I mean, it just happenstance that I even knew about this. He was just like, well, if you want to know, here's what we saw, and, you could tell it was truthful. And usually a lot of these times I make friends because I've listened to them in a serious way, and then I kind of get to know them. And that if I don't, if I speak to them a second or third time, it really helps clarify whether I think that person is on the level, or do they seem like a truthful person? Are they now offering other tales? Oh, and those other time I saw UFOs, and but you can only do your best. I'm not a trained, investigator or, policeman or anything like that. And a lot of this is just gut feeling. But the more people you talk to, you do get a better gut feeling on the ones that you can put more stock in than the ones that I can't be sure they're saying what they're saying, and that I just have to go with it. So hard to say. Well,
Lyle, we appreciate it. What's your next project that you're working on? Where are you going from here?
Well, right now, I'm working with Small Town Monsters again as the executive producer this time for a Mothman documentary. It's called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. And in this case, I'll be I was the narrator on the Boggy Creek Monster documentary, and that seemed to work well, and people were receptive. So I'll probably work in a capacity like that. So it's fun to kind of get a little bit more into the film thing. So I kind of intersperse those with the books. I love writing books, and that's really where I can, offer the most detailed information. So we got some Small Town Monsters things coming up that I'm participating in, and that should be out maybe later this summer. And as well, I've got numerous appearances coming up at Ohio Bigfoot Conference and the Mothman Festival later this fall. So it's going to be a busy year, but a fun year, because I just love this subject and love getting out there and talking to people and investigating these cases.
Lyle Blackburn, our guest, Beyond Boggy Creek, in search of the Southern Sasquatch. You can find information. You can also check him out on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/Monstro Bizarro. We'll have links to that and his website at lyleblackburn.com on our site, so you'll be able to catch up with him there. Well, that's it for yet another evening, Tim. Boy, these nights are just peeling by.
Yes, they
Sometimes
are.
It feels like we do it all in a day, Tim. That's the feel I get when I do this. I don't know about you, but it just goes by too quickly. We're having a great time. We've got a lot of other cool topics that we're covering the rest of this week. Just to kind of touch base with you again on that, tomorrow, the Great Pyramid Hoax, conspiracies to conceal the true history of ancient Egypt. Scott Creighton will join us. Thursday, the Ghost Brothers, Dalen Spratt, will be our guest as we talk about the new series kicking off on TLC and about his experiences with the paranormal. Fun show. We'll talk about that. And Friday, mysterious tales from people you'd least expect. Dr. Karen Stalsno will be our guest on that evening, Tim.
Yeah.
Let me mention this too. We're also a part of the Coast to Coast family, which we broadcast right here from Leighton Broadcasting, KNSI in St. Cloud, where they allow us to do our program here and our podcasts. But they also have Coast to Coast is on Monday through Sunday. And they're all different topics and a good mixed bag. I'll be back again March 25th and taking a look at a new topic. I'm trying to find some really cool aspect to go after this time. But please do me a favor. Check out what George Norrie has. If you like our show, you're going to love Coast to Coast as well. They look at the fringe elements of our world, our science, our beliefs. And tomorrow they're going to be talking about, or actually tonight, they're going to be talking about something I think is really fascinating. Kenneth Stoller, MD, will be on with George Norrie, and they're going to be talking about, focusing on brain-injured children and adults using hyperbaric oxygen treatment. And I know this is kind of controversial and out there, but there's really some interesting aspects. He'll also discuss Lyme disease epidemic. He contends that a large portion of the population have been infected with the bacteria and are susceptible to a wide range of complications. As a matter of fact, if you start looking at a lot of the complications from Lyme disease, and you may have gone undetected for years, not realizing it, another reason the out of doors is terrifying, you can have been bitten as a child and it may have laid dormant. And there are different strains of this Lyme disease that can wreak havoc on you, and especially bringing about these horrific feelings of fatigue and body just breaking down and no explanation for it. No matter what you do, exercise, eating right, and you can't get the energy, swelling, pain. Go listen to this. I think it's going to be really fascinating. Kenneth Stoller is the guest tonight. And in the second half, vertebrate zoologist and author Bill Schutt is an expert in bloodthirsty creatures of the animal kingdom, from lice, ticks, and bedbugs to vampire bats and even humans. He's going to detail the phenomena of cannibalism in nature and among humans, including the truth about the Donner Party and the stranded rugby team in the Andes. That's tonight on the Best in Overnight Talk Radio with George Norrie. That's Coast to Coast AM. You can find information about that at coasttocoastam.com. And for all of your other podcast needs, make sure you check it out here at podcast1.com, because aside from the amazing show that is Beyond the Darkness, you've got so many other fascinating shows to listen to. It is a great opportunity for you to find shows on every genre, every kind of entertainment level, from deep thoughts to belly laughs. Everything is here. Podcast1.com. Check it out for yourself. And remember, show them a little love, because they give a home to the best in paranormal talk radio. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. This is Beyond the Darkness.